Year 1903. French chemist named Edouard Benedictus accidentally knocked over a glass flask in his lab and noticed something strange. The flask fell, hit the floor. But it didn't shatter. It cracked, sure, but it held together. Stayed in one piece more or less. Benedictus wasn't even working on glass at the time. He was studying cellulose nitrate, this early plastic compound used in photographic film. The flask had apparently been coated on the inside with a thin layer of dried cellulose nitrate, and that film had held the glass fragments together even after the impact. He could have ignored it, cleaned it up and moved on, but he didn't. He remembered it. And then, maybe a few days later, maybe weeks, he read a newspaper article about a car accident where someone had been badly injured by flying glass from the windshield. And he thought about that flask. That broken flask that hadn't really broken. So he started experimenting, layering glass with cellulose nitrate, trying to recreate that effect on purpose. What he ended up with was laminated safety glass, 2 sheets of glass with a transparent plastic layer sandwiched between them. When it broke, the pieces stuck to the plastic instead of flying everywhere. He patented it in 1909 under the name Triplex, but nobody cared. The auto industry wasn't interested. Too expensive, probably. Too complicated. Why change something that worked, even if it was dangerous? Then World War I happened. Suddenly, the military needed materials that could withstand pressure without failing catastrophically. Gas mask lenses, vehicle windshields. Safety glass became invaluable. And after the war, as cars got faster and more common, manufacturers finally started adopting it. By the 20s and 30s, it was standard. A simple accident in a chemistry lab had led to one of the most important safety innovations of the modern era. Nobody planned it. Nobody was trying to reinvent glass. It just happened. 1945. A laboratory at the Raytheon Corporation in Massachusetts. Engineer named Percy Spencer working on radar equipment, magnetrons specifically, these vacuum tubes that produced microwaves for radar systems. The war had just ended, and now everyone was trying to figure out what to do with all this military technology. Could it be useful for regular people? Spencer was standing near an active magnetron one day when he noticed something odd. The chocolate bar in his pocket had melted, not just softened, completely liquefied. The room wasn't hot. There was no obvious heat source, just the magnetron. So he tested it, put some popcorn kernels near the tube. They popped, scattered across the floor. He tried an egg next, put it in a metal kettle, and aimed the microwaves at it. The egg exploded, hit a colleague in the face. But the point was clear. Microwaves could cook food, not by heating the air around it like a normal oven, but by exciting water molecules inside the food itself. Cooking from the inside out. Spencer built the first microwave cooking box with Raytheon's help. It was massive, refrigerator-sized, water-cooled magnetrons, thick shielding to contain the radiation. But it worked. Food cooked rapidly. They filed a patent in 1946, released the first commercial microwave oven in 1947. Called it the radar range. Nearly 6 feet tall, weighed over 300 kilograms, cost several $1,000s. It was meant for restaurants and ships, not homes, and people were scared of it at first. Microwaves were unfamiliar. There were myths that they made food radioactive or damaged human tissue. But over time, as the technology improved and the size and cost dropped, acceptance grew. By the late 60s and early 70s, microwave ovens were smaller and affordable. The fast-paced lifestyle of modern cities made speed and convenience appealing. By the 80s, the microwave had gone from scientific curiosity to kitchen staple. All because of a melted chocolate bar. Spencer never set out to revolutionize cooking. He was focused on radar. But he noticed something small and unusual and investigated it. From that single observation, an entire industry was born. Winter of 1895. University of Würzburg in Germany. Physics professor named Wilhelm Röntgen experimenting with cathode ray tubes. These glass tubes filled with electrical components that emitted rays of unknown nature when electrified. Invisible beams that fascinated physicists trying to understand the basic forces of the universe. Röntgen was experienced, 50 years old, decades studying light and energy. That evening in November, he had enclosed one of the tubes in black cardboard to prevent light from escaping while he measured its behavior. The lab was dark. When he activated the current, something unexpected happened. Several feet away, he noticed a faint green glow on a screen coated with barium platinocyanide, a fluorescent material. The glow persisted even though the tube was completely sealed. Röntgen was confused. Whatever was causing the screen to light up wasn't ordinary visible light. Wasn't the known cathode rays either, which couldn't pass through heavy cardboard. So he started experimenting. Placed various objects between the tube and the screen. Books, wooden blocks, metal sheets. Many of them were transparent to this mysterious energy. Only dense substances like lead blocked it. And when he placed his hand in front of the screen, he saw the outline of his bones projected in glowing contrast against the soft shadow of his flesh. It was extraordinary. He had discovered a new kind of ray, invisible, penetrating, capable of revealing the internal structure of solely X-rays, using objects. He called them the mathematical symbol X to denote the unknown. For weeks, Röntgen worked in secret. He wanted to understand the phenomenon fully before announcing it. He studied the rays, documented their properties, began capturing images, what we now call radiographs. One of the first was a skeletal image of his wife's hand. The photograph showed not just bones, but the shadow of her wedding ring. When he finally published his findings, in December 1895, the scientific community was stunned. Within weeks, newspapers around the world carried stories about this invisible light that could see through flesh and wood. The public was fascinated and disturbed. There were sensational headlines speculating that privacy itself might be under threat. But the practical uses became apparent almost immediately. Within months, physicians began using X-rays to locate bullets, fractures, foreign objects inside the human body. Battlefield medicine during World War I wouldn't have been the same without them. Surgeons could operate with precision, guided by a non-invasive window into the body. Röntgen refused to patent his discovery. He believed the knowledge belonged to science and humanity. His humility earned him admiration, and in 1901, he became the first recipient of the Nobel Prize in Physics. The dangers of radiation exposure weren't understood at the time. Early radiologists would expose themselves repeatedly to X-rays without protection. It would take decades before the risks became clear and protective shielding and strict protocols were developed. But the fundamental nature of Röntgen's invention remains unchanged. More than a century later, X-rays continue to be one of the most widely used tools in medicine, engineering, security. They detect diseases, inspect materials, scan luggage at airports. The basic principle, high energy waves passing through some substances and being absorbed by others, remains as powerful and relevant today as it was in 1895. Röntgen's discovery didn't arise from a deliberate search for new technology. It came from curiosity, careful observation, willingness to follow the evidence. The cathode ray tube had been studied by many, but Röntgen noticed something no one else had seen and pursued it with quiet persistence. X-rays opened the first true window into the invisible. Before their discovery, the interior of the human body was a mystery unless surgically opened. With X-rays, the boundary between surface and structure blurred. Medicine, science, even the way we understand the world changed forever. These are just the first few stories. There are more coming, more accidents that nobody planned, more moments where someone noticed something strange and decided to investigate instead of ignoring it. We'll look at fasteners inspired by nature, adhesives that were too weak to be useful until they found their perfect purpose, and medical devices that came from grabbing the wrong component out of a drawer. The pattern continues. Velcro. In the summer of 1941, a Swiss engineer named Georges de Mestral took his dog for a walk through alpine meadows near his home. The walk itself was ordinary, something he did often, but when he returned, he noticed his clothing and the dog's fur were covered with burrs, small seed pods from burdock plants that clung stubbornly to fabric and fur. Most people would have brushed them off without thinking. De Mestral didn't. He was curious by nature, methodical. Instead of just removing the burrs, he took one to his microscope. What he saw under magnification changed everything. The burr's surface was covered with tiny hooks, hundreds of them. Each hook latched onto loops in the fabric of his pants and the fibers of his dog's coat. It was elegant, simple, but effective. A natural fastening mechanism that had evolved to help the plant spread its seeds. The burr would attach itself to passing animals, get carried away, eventually fall off somewhere else. De Mestral saw something else, though. He saw possibility. What if you could recreate this mechanism artificially? A fastening system that was reusable, durable, didn't require buttons or zippers or tying. The idea seemed simple enough, but turning it into a manufactured product that took over a decade. He started working on prototypes right away, trying to mimic the hook and loop mechanism using materials available in the 1940s. His early attempts failed, creating synthetic hooks that were strong enough to latch but flexible enough to release. That wasn't easy. The loops needed the right density too, the right consistency. For years he struggled. Traditional weaving methods couldn't produce the microscopic hooks he needed. Eventually he discovered that new at the time could be manip nylon, which was relatively elated under heat to form stiff hook-like shapes. By cutting nylon into loops and then trimming and shaping them precisely, he could replicate the burr's behavior. But even with a working prototype, he faced skepticism. Many in the textile industry dismissed it. Impractical, they said, unappealing. It lacked the elegance of buttons, the reliability of zippers. Some people found the sound unpleasant, that sharp ripping noise when the hooks detached from the loops. Still, de Mestral persisted. He named his invention Velcro, a combination of the French words velours, meaning velvet, and crochet, meaning hook. In 1955, he patented it and began producing Velcro commercially. The early manufacturing process was slow, expensive. Machines had to be designed from scratch to cut, shape, align the hooks and loops in precise configuration, NS. But by the late 50s and early 60s, improvements in automation made mass production feasible. Velcro found its first major success, not in fashion, but in aerospace. NASA engineers were constantly searching for materials that would function in zero gravity. They saw the potential immediately. In space, buttons and zippers could be cumbersome. Velcro offered a quick, secure way to fasten objects and clothing. It became standard in spacesuits, equipment belts, interior spacecraft design. This unexpected validation from the space industry sparked renewed interest. Soon, Velcro began appearing in ski gear, medical equipment, children's shoes. The fastener's ease of use made it ideal. No tying, no threading, no complicated mechanics. Perfect for people with disabilities, for emergency responders, for industrial settings where gloves and speed limited dexterity. Over time, Velcro transformed the way we think about fastening. It moved from novel invention to silent standard, hidden in sneakers, securing blood pressure cuffs, keeping remote controls attached to walls. It became ubiquitous, yet its origin remained as quiet and humble as the man who created it. Georges de Mestral never marketed himself as a revolutionary inventor. He simply observed a problem. noticed how nature had solved it, committed himself to replicating that solution with human tools. He died in 1990, but by that time, Velcro had become a global brand, a staple of modern design. And it all began with a small persistent burr, a plant's way of traveling through the world, and one man's decision to stop, look closer, wonder how it worked, post-it notes. In the early 1970s, deep within the laboratories of 3M in Minnesota, a chemist named Spencer Silver was working on what seemed like a dead-end project. He was attempting to develop a powerful adhesive, something strong, industrial grade. But what he ended up with was the opposite. A weak, pressure-sensitive adhesive that could stick lightly to surfaces, but peel off easily, leaving no residue. It wasn't what anyone at 3M had asked for. In a company known for high-performance adhesives, a glue that barely stuck seemed like a failure. Silver was intrigued, though. The adhesive wasn't useless, just different. It could be applied and removed multiple times, over and over without losing its tack. For most of the scientific community at the time, this feature wasn't useful, but Silver believed it had potential. For years, he promoted the adhesive internally at 3M holding seminars, offering samples, hoping someone might find a practical application. Nothing came of it. Engineers and developers were unimpressed. The invention seemed like a solution in search of a problem. That problem would finally be discovered by another 3M employee, Art Fry, a product developer and church choir singer. Every Sunday, Fry sang from a hymnal during rehearsals. Like many others, he used small slips of paper to mark important pages. Like many others, he was frustrated when those slips fell out. One day during rehearsal, he remembered Silver's seminar about the reusable adhesive. What if, Fry wondered, he could apply that adhesive to bookmarks? Something that would stay in place, but not damage the paper when removed. The idea was simple. He went back to the lab, began experimenting with small squares of paper, coating the back with Silver's adhesive. The result was paper that could be stuck lightly to surfaces and repositioned as needed. It didn't fall out. It didn't tear the page. It worked. Fry refined the prototype with help from Silver and other colleagues. Eventually, they created pads of these papers, small squares with a strip of adhesive on the back. They could be peeled off one at a time, used to leave notes, reminders, page markers, removed without a trace. It was a quiet, almost humble tool, but it filled a niche no one had realized was empty. Convincing 3M to bring it to market wasn't easy, though. Management was unsure if anyone would actually buy small sticky papers. They tested the product in a single city, Boise, Idaho, in 1977. Samples were handed out for free. The response was overwhelming. People didn't just use them, they came back asking for more. The feedback was so strong that 3M officially launched the product nationwide in 1980 under the name Post-it Notes. The name was simple. The impact was anything but. Offices, schools, laboratories, they all adopted the tool. It became a staple of modern communication, organization, creative thinking. Designers used them for storyboarding. Managers used them for meetings. Writers used them to outline ideas. Scientists used them to track samples. The physicality, the flexibility, the tactile quality of Post-it notes made them uniquely useful, even in a world that would soon go digital. Ironically, the accidental adhesive, the one that was too weak to be useful, had found its perfect purpose. The very qualities that made it unsuitable for traditional use became its greatest strengths: temporary, reusable, clean, non-destructive. Spencer Silver and Art Fry were later recognized as co-inventors. Their collaboration, rooted in persistence, serendipity, willingness to see value in imperfection, became one of the defining innovation stories of the 20th century. Neither of them had planned to create a global office supply icon. but by observing real-world needs and trusting the accidental utility of a failed product, they transformed the everyday habits of millions. Today, Post-it notes exist in dozens of colors, shapes, sizes. Though alternatives have emerged, few carry the same symbolic weight. A yellow square stuck to a computer monitor or refrigerator door still evokes intention. A note left behind, a thought captured in the moment, a small invention born from an adhesive that wasn't supposed to work became one of the quiet engines of human organization. Pacemaker. In the 1950s, medical science was advancing rapidly. Antibiotics had become widespread. Surgical techniques were improving. Electricity was increasingly being explored as a tool for treating the human body. Amid these developments, one of the most transformative devices in modern medicine was born. Not through intentional design, but through an unexpected accident in a laboratory. The story begins with Wilson Greatbatch, an American engineer and professor with a background in electronics and growing interest in biomedical applications. At the time, he was working on a device intended to record faint electrical signals from the human heart. Understanding those signals was crucial for diagnosing cardiac conditions. His goal was to create a small, efficient circuit that could amplify and log those impulses for study. In 1956, while assembling the prototype, Greatbatch reached for a resistor, a common component used to control electrical current. But instead of the 10,000 ohm resistor his design called for, he accidentally installed a 1 megohm resistor. The circuit was completed, but something unexpected happened. Rather than recording heart signals, the device began to emit them, producing a rhythmic electrical pulse. It wasn't constant. It came in steady repeating intervals, mimicking the pattern of a human heartbeat. Greatbatch immediately recognized what he had stumbled upon. This circuit, though assembled incorrectly, could be the foundation for something far greater than a diagnostic tool. What he had accidentally built was the heart of a pacemaker, a device that could regulate the electrical rhythm of a failing heart by sending pulses at precise intervals. At the time, pacemakers did exist, but they were bulky external machines, often powered by wall current, connected to the patient through electrodes taped to the skin or inserted through open wounds. They were effective only in hospital settings, and even then their use was limited. The idea of an implantable pacemaker, small, portable, battery-powered, was still only a vision. Greatbatch saw the potential immediately. Working with doctors William Chardak and Andrew Gage at the Veterans Administration Hospital in Buffalo, New York, he began developing a functioning implantable prototype. The challenges were enormous: biocompatibility, long-term power supply, miniaturization, safety, all had to be addressed. He encased his circuit in epoxy resin, sealing it against body fluids. For the power source, he used a small mercury-zinc battery. The device was roughly the size of a cigarette pack, much larger than modern pacemakers, but revolutionary for its time. After extensive animal testing, the first human implantation was performed in 1960. The patient was a 77-year-old man with complete heart block, a condition in which the heart's natural electrical signals don't travel properly through cardiac tissue, leading to dangerously slow heartbeats or complete pauses. The implanted pacemaker took over, delivering steady impulses that maintained his circulation. The operation was a success. The man lived another 18 months, far longer than expected for someone with his condition. Word of the breakthrough spread quickly. Soon, more devices were implanted. Improvements followed. Smaller designs, longer-lasting batteries, more precise circuitry. But the basic concept remained rooted in that accidental resistor, a device that mimics the body's electrical rhythm to keep the heart beating. The modern pacemaker has evolved into a marvel of biomedical engineering. Today's devices are smaller than a matchbox, capable of adjusting their pacing in response to physical activity, can last more than a decade without replacement. Some models communicate wirelessly with external monitors, Yet they all descend from that first accidental pulse generated in Wilson Greatbatch's lab. By the time of his death in 2011, Greatbatch held over 300 patents, many in the field of medical devices. But it was the pacemaker that remained his most impactful invention. He never forgot that the discovery had come not through genius, but through a simple mistake. The wrong resistor pulled from a drawer. A quiet reminder that the path to innovation is rarely direct. Accidents, when met with insight and persistence, can lead to discoveries that extend life itself. The pattern holds. More accidents are coming. More moments where someone noticed something strange, something wrong, something unexpected, and decided to investigate instead of ignoring it. These weren't scientists searching for glory or engineers chasing patents. They were people doing routine work who happened to be paying attention when something unusual occurred. And that attention, that curiosity, that willingness to follow an accident wherever it led, that's what changed everything. Teflon. April 1938, New Jersey, DuPont's Jackson Laboratory. A chemist named Roy Plunkett was doing routine work with refrigerants. Nothing exciting, just standard chemical research, the kind of thing that fills lab notebooks and leads nowhere most of the time. He was working with tetrafluoroethylene gas, storing it in pressurized cylinders kept at really low temperatures, cold enough to keep the gas stable and manageable. On this particular morning, Plunkett and his assistant were setting up for an experiment. They needed to release the gas from one of the cylinders into a reaction chamber. Standard procedure. They opened the valve, expecting the gas to flow out. Nothing happened. The valve was open, the cylinder should have been full, but no gas came out. First thought, maybe there's a leak, but when they weighed the cylinder, it was still the same weight. So the gas hadn't escaped, it was still inside somehow. Plunkett decided to cut the cylinder open to see what was going on. What he found inside didn't make sense at first. The interior walls were coated with a strange white waxy powder, slippery to touch, odorless, unlike anything he'd seen before. The gas had somehow transformed into this solid material on its own, just sitting there in the cylinder. Nobody had heated it, or added chemicals, or done anything deliberate. It just happened. Testing showed this new substance was ridiculously stable, didn't react with other chemicals, didn't corrode, didn't dissolve in solvents. Heat didn't affect it much. Cold didn't either, and its surface was so smooth that basically nothing stuck to it. The coefficient of friction was lower than any known solid at the time. Plunkett had accidentally created polytetrafluoroethylene, PTFE, what would eventually be called Teflon. At first, nobody really knew what to do with it. DuPont recognized it was unusual, but practical applications weren't obvious. It took years before the material found its first real uses, and those were military and industrial. The stuff resisted chemical corrosion so well, it was perfect for seals and gaskets in extreme conditions. During the Manhattan Project, when scientists were building the first atomic bomb, they needed something that could handle uranium hexafluoride, an insanely reactive compound that would destroy most materials. Teflon could handle it. After the war, engineers started finding more uses, but the most famous application came from France in the 1950s. A French engineer named Marc Gregoire was using Teflon to reduce friction on fishing lines. His wife suggested, maybe half joking, that he should try coating a frying pan with it. He did. Food didn't stick at all. In 1954, they started selling non-stick cookware. By the 1960s, it was everywhere. Suddenly cooking was easier, cleaning was easier. You needed less oil. Home cooks loved it. But Teflon went way beyond kitchens. Its thermal stability made it essential for aerospace. NASA used it in spacecraft wiring, fuel lines, insulation. Spacesuits incorporated it. Satellites used it. In medicine, it showed up in implants, surgical instruments, hospital tubing. Teflon-coated catheters reduced infection rates. In electronics, it became standard for insulating high-frequency cables, helped computers run faster and more reliably. Automotive industry used it in gaskets, bearings, transmission systems. The stuff was everywhere. There were controversies later, mostly around PFOA, a chemical used in manufacturing Teflon. Not in the final product itself, but during production it caused environmental and health issues. By the mid-2000s, that chemical was phased out. Modern Teflon is made without it. But the core material, PTFE, remains one of the most versatile substances discovered in the 20th century. It's in homes, hospitals, satellites, engines, factories, crosses every discipline you can think of. Roy Plunkett never intended to create a new class of materials. He was working on refrigerants, practical, narrow goal. But the cylinder that wouldn't release its gas led him somewhere completely different. He said later that discovering Teflon wasn't about inspiration, it was about keeping your eyes open. It was an accident, sure, but one that got noticed and investigated. Today, Teflon is just there, quiet, coating surfaces, protecting systems, reducing wear. Lets machines run longer, cooks work cleaner, technologies reach farther. One of those rare inventions that once it exists seems almost inevitable, like it was always waiting to be found. Penicillin. Late summer of 1928. St Mary's Hospital in London. A Scottish bacteriologist named Alexander Fleming was returning from a 2-week vacation. His workspace was cluttered with open petri dishes used to culture Staphylococcus bacteria, common pathogen, sometimes dangerous. The work was routine. Fleming was studying ways to combat bacterial infections, which at that time were often deadly, even from minor wounds. Medicine had almost no defense against bacterial diseases back then. Infections like pneumonia, tuberculosis, septicemia, they claimed countless lives. Antiseptics existed, but they were harsh and mostly ineffective once bacteria entered the bloodstream. On the morning of September 3rd, Fleming started sorting through the plates he'd left sitting around during his vacation. As he examined one dish, he noticed something unusual. A patch of blue-green mold had contaminated the culture. This wasn't surprising by itself. Mold contamination was pretty common in any lab that wasn't perfectly sterile. But what stood out was the halo of clarity surrounding the mold. The Staphylococcus colonies had been destroyed in a wide ring around it. Fleming looked closer. Where the mold had grown, the bacteria had vanished. The effect was precise, unmistakable. The mold was killing the bacteria. He isolated the contaminating organism, identified it as a strain of Penicillium notatum. Further tests confirmed what he suspected. The mold secreted a substance that inhibited the growth of many harmful bacteria. He named it penicillin. Fleming's initial results were promising enough. He found that penicillin was non-toxic to human cells but lethal to a wide range of bacteria. However, isolating and purifying the substance proved really difficult. The compound was fragile, unstable, hard to extract in significant quantities. Fleming lacked the tools and resources to develop it further. He published his findings in 1929 in the British Journal of Experimental Pathology. The article attracted almost no attention. For nearly a decade, penicillin remained a scientific curiosity, a footnote in bacteriology rather than a practical tool. That began to change in the late 1930s, when a team at the University of Oxford took interest in Fleming's work. Howard Florey, Ernst Chain, Norman Heatley. They recognized penicillin's potential and launched an ambitious effort to isolate and mass-produce it. Chain developed new purification techniques, while Florey led animal and human trials. The results were astonishing. Penicillin rapidly cleared otherwise fatal infections in mice, and soon after in critically ill patients. The first successful human treatment occurred in 1941. A man suffering from a severe blood infection began to recover after receiving penicillin, until the supply ran out. He died soon after. The team realized that to save lives, they needed large-scale production. But the war was on, and Britain lacked the industrial capacity to manufacture the drug. Florey and Heatley traveled to the United States, where they partnered with American pharmaceutical companies and government agencies. With the urgency of World War II behind them, efforts accelerated. Scientists screened thousands of mold strains, eventually finding a particularly potent one on a moldy cantaloupe in Peoria, Illinois. By 1944, penicillin was being mass-produced and distributed to Allied troops. It drastically reduced battlefield deaths from infected wounds, saved countless lives. After the war, it became available to civilians, ushering in the antibiotic era, a turning point in medical history. Diseases that had once been death sentences could now be treated with a simple injection. Child mortality dropped. Surgical outcomes improved. Life expectancy rose. The discovery of penicillin transformed not only medicine, but society itself. Changed the way doctors practiced, how hospitals operated, how people thought about disease and recovery. Fleming, Florey, and Chain shared the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine in 1945. Fleming remained modest about his role. He often emphasized that many great discoveries come not from genius, but from recognizing the importance of the unexpected. The story of penicillin isn't just about the power of mold. It's about observation, persistence, collaboration, a forgotten petri dish, a ring of dead bacteria, the instinct to investigate. These simple elements led to one of the most important medical breakthroughs of the 20th century. Today, penicillin and its derivatives remain in use, though resistance has made newer antibiotics necessary. But the legacy of that accidental discovery lives on in every hospital, every prescription, every life saved from what was once a fatal infection. Artificial sweeteners. Fall of 1879. Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore. A young Russian-born chemist named Konstantin Fahlberg was working late into the evening. He'd been studying the chemical composition of coal tar derivatives under Professor Ira Remsen's supervision. Their research focused on the molecular behavior of substituted benzoic sulfonic acids, a subject with no obvious connection to food, let alone sweetness. After hours in the lab, Fahlberg went home for dinner. As he began eating, he noticed something strange. The bread tasted sweet. So did his utensils. Even his napkin carried a sugary flavor. It wasn't the meal. It was his hands. He'd forgotten to wash them properly after the day's experiments. Realizing this, he rushed back to the laboratory. He began tasting, carefully and deliberately, every beaker and flask he'd worked with. One of them, containing a substance formed during a particular reaction sequence, produced the same unmistakable sweetness. That compound would later be identified as saccharin, the world's first artificial sweetener. Unlike sugar, saccharin had no calories. It was chemically distinct and orders of magnitude sweeter. Even in tiny amounts, it could deliver intense sweetness. Fahlberg quickly recognized the commercial potential. Without informing his academic advisor, he patented the compound and began marketing it as a sugar substitute. The move caused tension between Fahlberg and Remsen, who felt the discovery belonged to their shared laboratory. Still, Fahlberg went on to make a small fortune from his new product. Initially, saccharin was viewed with skepticism. Its synthetic origin, metallic aftertaste, unfamiliar name, all kept it on the fringes of public acceptance. But as sugar prices fluctuated and health concerns around diabetes and obesity began to grow, interest in calorie-free alternatives increased. By the early 20th century, saccharin was being used in small quantities in food products. During both World Wars, sugar shortages prompted broader adoption. With real sugar in short supply, artificial sweeteners became an affordable and stable alternative. The pattern continued. In 1937, a graduate student named Michael Sveda was working on antipyretic compounds at the University of Illinois. He smoked a cigarette in the lab, common habit at the time, and noticed a sweet taste on his lips. The substance he'd just synthesized had transferred to the cigarette paper. The compound was cyclamate, another calorie-free sweetener. Then, in 1965, a chemist named James Schlatter was researching anti-ulcer medications for G.D. Searle. While synthesizing a chain of peptides, he accidentally licked his finger to pick up a piece of paper and tasted unusual sweetness. He'd discovered aspartame, a compound 200 times sweeter than sugar. It would become one of the most widely used sweeteners in the world. The pattern was consistent. Accidents in chemical laboratories leading to the discovery of intensely sweet compounds, all structurally unrelated to natural sugars. Over time, the list grew to include acesulfame K, sucralose, neotame, others. Each had its own story, chemical structure, unique interaction with the human palate. Most were discovered not through targeted research on food additives, but through unrelated pharmaceutical or chemical investigations. Nearly all were stumbled upon by researchers who noticed something unusual, often after tasting their own work unintentionally. Artificial sweeteners became a cornerstone of the modern food industry. Stry. They enabled diet sodas, low-calorie desserts, sugar-free chewing gums, products aimed at diabetics and weight-conscious consumers. Their use sparked decades of debate about safety, metabolism, long-term health effects. Regulatory agencies studied them in detail. While some concerns persisted, most sweeteners were ultimately deemed safe within prescribed limits. Still, the origins remain rooted in pure serendipity. None were created by chefs or nutritionists. They came from chemical benches, glassware, late nights in laboratories where the goal was never sweetness. Yet, through observation, accident, curiosity, sweetness was exactly what was found. So what does all of this mean? These 10 inventions, they share something beyond just being accidents. They represent a particular kind of discovery that happens when people are paying attention to the world around them instead of just following a script. Safety glass came from a broken flask that didn't shatter the way it should have. The microwave oven came from a melted chocolate bar. X-rays came from a glow on a screen that shouldn't have been glowing. Velcro came from burrs on a dog's fur. Post-it notes came from an adhesive that failed at being strong. The pacemaker came from installing the wrong resistor. Teflon came from a gas cylinder that wouldn't release its contents. Penicillin came from mold contaminating a petri dish. Artificial sweeteners came from unwashed hands and accidental tastes in chemistry labs. None of these were planned. None of them came from someone sitting down and deciding to revolutionize their field. They came from people who noticed something unusual and decided not to ignore it. And maybe that's the real lesson here. Innovation doesn't always come from careful planning or deliberate genius. Sometimes it comes from accidents, from mistakes, from things going wrong in just the right way. But the accident itself isn't enough. What matters is what happens next. Whether someone notices, whether they investigate, whether they see potential in something that everyone else would dismiss as a failure or a fluke. Edward Benedictus could have cleaned up that broken flask and moved on. Percy Spencer could have thrown away his melted chocolate and grabbed another one. Wilhelm Röntgen could have ignored that glowing screen. Georges de Mestral could have brushed off those burrs without a second thought. Spencer Silver could have abandoned his weak adhesive as a failed experiment. Wilson Greatbatch could have tossed out that circuit with the wrong resistor. Roy Plunkett could have just ordered a new gas cylinder. Alexander Fleming could have thrown away that contaminated petri dish. Konstantin Fahlberg could have washed his hands and forgotten about the sweet taste, but they didn't. They paid attention. They asked questions. They followed their curiosity wherever it led, even when it led somewhere completely unexpected. And because they did, the world changed. We drive safer cars because of a broken flask. We cook faster meals because of a melted chocolate bar. We see inside the human body without cutting it open because of a mysterious glow. We fasten our shoes and jackets more easily because of plant burrs. We leave notes and reminders because of a glue that barely worked. We keep hearts beating because of the wrong resistor. We cook on surfaces where nothing sticks because of a gas that transformed itself. We survive infections that would have killed us a century ago because of accidental mold contamination. We sweeten our food without calories because us chemists forgot to wash their hands. These aren't just interesting stories about lucky breaks. They're reminders that progress doesn't always follow a straight line from problem to solution. Sometimes it takes a detour through accident and observation. Sometimes the biggest breakthroughs come from the smallest mistakes. Sometimes changing the world starts with noticing something that doesn't quite make sense and deciding to figure out why. So maybe the next time something goes wrong, the next time something unexpected happens, the next time you notice something that doesn't fit your expectations, don't just ignore it. Don't just clean it up and move on. Look closer, ask questions, investigate, because you never know. That accident, that mistake, that weird thing that doesn't make sense, it might just be the beginning of something that changes everything.